Welcome back. In this lecture, you are going to learn something very important when it comes to improving your website, and that is understanding which are your most popular pages and which are your least popular pages. You're also going to learn where on your website most people enter, that is where they have their first session going straight into your website, where most people exit your website, and also which pages that has the highest bounce rate. Bounce rate being they first enter your website, they don't do anything, and then they just exit. All super important information. Let's dive in. So as always, we're going to move over to the left, click on reports, and then we're going to go down to engagement and then down to pages and screens. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do here, if you've been following me since the previous lecture, is to go onto the upper right corner and change from 12 months to the last 28 days. The reason being, when we're looking at what is working on your website, we're looking at what is working right now. Because remember, in the span of a year, you probably have new pages, you probably have new articles and new things going on your website, and you want to make sure you see what is working and what isn't working right now. And the sweet spot for that is going to be 28 or 30 days. So scrolling down, the first thing we can see is the pages themselves. We can see which pages has the most views, but as always, that is surface data. We need to dive deeper. Unlike the other reports, it's not going to be important which pages generate the most revenue, because again, when it comes to product pages, they don't generate revenue. They lead them to, for example, a checkout page, which then will generate revenue. You will also have articles. You will also have a lot of navigational pages, which aren't going to generate revenue, but that are going to build relationships. So we're looking deeper here than just the revenue. So in order to understand what people like and dislike on your website, we are looking at average engagement time, how much time they're spending on your website on that particular page. So let's start looking at a couple of numbers and then dissecting that data. The first thing we have is this one. Now, basically what this means is the home page. It doesn't say home, but this is the URL over here and then just a forward slash, and that means the home page. Here, for example, we have the home page / basket. So whenever there's nothing behind here, that's gonna mean the home page. Now, looking over to the right, we can see that if you look at this column, we have an approximate average of around 1 minute on most of these pages, ranging from the top views. Why is it that the homepage only has half a minute? And that's going to make a lot of sense when you think about the purpose of a homepage. The purpose of a homepage is to introduce who you are, what your brand is, etc., and then navigate them somewhere else on the website. Now, also looking down, we can see that a really poor average engagement time is down here with just 9 seconds, but that makes sense because this is the sign-in page, and it would be weird if people had to spend up towards a minute just signing into their account. So we always have to look deeper at the data of what is the data, where is it, and what does it mean. Now, here's where the data gets a little bit more interesting. So for example, if we look up and we look at the first actual product page, that is going to be this one, Google Redesign Apparel. It has a 48-second average engagement time, and if I want to check out this page, all I need to do is select it, copy it, open a new tab, write in the URL, and then just paste it in. So we know that this page is getting a lot of traffic and it also has a good average engagement time. However, looking down, things start to get interesting when you look down and see a page like this one, the Google Redesign Stationery page. Now, in 28 days, it's gotten 10,500 views, which is huge. However, it only has a 15-second average engagement time. Of course, the question is why? So what we can do is we can just grab this page, copy, change the ending here, paste it in, and start looking around. Now, there might be nothing obvious here as to why that is, other than we can conclude that this is not a very popular page. And if you were to go to the back end of your store and see, hey, it's actually true, these products aren't selling that much and they don't have a good average engagement time, that would be a prime example of looking at your data, seeing where people are engaging very little and realizing that this is something that isn't very interesting to this particular audience. Now, heading back, we also have to remember that there is a difference between views and users. Views is the total amount of times that the page has been viewed. So for example, one user can view the same page multiple times, but one user is still just that same user or person. So we can see, for example, that the basket has a lot of views per user, which makes sense because you go in, you add a product, you check the basket, you add a product, you check the basket. But the most interesting data by far when it comes to popularity is going to be your average engagement engagement time. So what we can do is we can hover our mouse over here and then click on this arrow to see which page has the highest average engagement and which one has the lowest. So starting with the highest one, we can see that this one isn't getting as many views as the rest of the site, but this is something that's really popular. So if we want to learn what people are really checking out, we can grab this URL, head over here, remove this, and start looking with fresh eyes and asking the question, why is this so popular? Now, I would dare to say that my spontaneous idea would be that most likely people who go to a Google shop, they are interested in getting Google product. That means things like a tote bag that has the Google logo, maybe coffee cups, maybe a jacket that has the Google logo. As we can see, everything in here is branded very clearly with Google. And it would make a lot of sense to me that those are going to be the most popular products on their shop. Comparing again, for example, this one, the stationery page, which has very little average engagement time. There's nothing clear here that says Google. Well, we have a Google sticker there, but overall, there's very little that says Google in here. And I think that is just going against the entire idea of a Google shop for Google fanatics. Because again, Google is the biggest search engine in the world, but it does take a certain type of person who want to go into the shop of a search engine. Then you're probably a dedicated Google fan. So a good idea would be to produce Google product with clear Google branding. Now, similarly, if we reverse this one and see which has the worst average engagement time, this is also a very good way to find which of your pages aren't working. And when I say aren't working, I'm talking about potentially broken pages, which is a reason to only spend around 3, 4, 5 seconds, but also pages that aren't fulfilling the wishes of the traffic. So for example, on our page, if we would have a page that was about, let's say, designing clothes, and we saw that it had a really low average engagement time, it would be pretty easy to come to the assumption that people aren't here to learn anything about that subject. They want to focus on the gaming niche and on the blue light blocking glasses. So in the end, we always need to look deeper at the data and understand, what does this mean? So looking at the average engagement time here, we can see that these ones are getting really little views and they have a super low average engagement time. So I'm going to assume that this page is probably broken, but let's go ahead and check that out. I'm going to select it, copy it, go in here, remove this, paste it in and hit enter. And it says page unavailable. So that makes a lot of sense, because even a boring page usually will get more than 3 seconds of average engagement time. So this is an amazing way, especially when you have a lot of things and a lot of pages going on your website, to find what is working, what isn't working, and even worse, what is broken. So once again, I really recommend that when you watch for your pages, which are the ones that are working and which are the ones that aren't, I recommend using the last 28 days, because a website goes through a lot of changes over time and you want to get the most recent data. So now that you know the pages that are getting the most views, the most users, the highest and the lowest average engagement times, meaning the most popular and least popular pages, there's another question to ask. Where are people coming in the most to our website? Where are people exiting the most? And where are people bouncing the most? Now, that used to be very clear in Google Analytics 3, Universal Analytics. So here we have to sort of create those columns ourselves. So what we're going to do is move over to the left and click on Explore. And then we're going to head into Freeform. So in here, we're going to create a form that is going to show all of our pages and is going to have all of our active users and show where people have entered the most, where people have exited the most, and where people have bounced the most. So let's go ahead and set that up and just follow me step by step here. So the first setup of this is going to be the variables and the tab settings. Now the tab settings is the entire look of this tab or these columns, the data we want displayed. The variables are going to be the data that we want included. So first things first, let's give this form a name. Let's call this entrance plus exit plus bounce rates. We're going to put it to the last 28 days. So I'm just going to leave this date range. And then for the segments, I am going to remove all of the segments, because a segment is just taking your traffic and then dividing it up. And I don't want to divide it up. You can, of course, if you want this specific data for example, men, or you want to segment it into women or a specific age or a specific location, etc. But for now, I'm going to do this on all of our visitors. So I'm going to just go ahead and click here and delete. And then we have the dimensions, and dimensions is basically another word for attributes. So how much attributes of the data that we're getting do we want to have included? For example, do we want to know the country of the people who are coming in and exiting the most of our data? And it just gets really deep down the rabbit hole. So we don't really need any dimensions for this. We want to know the pages that has the highest entrance, exit, and bounce rate. So I'm going to remove all of the dimensions. Just click on the exit here. And then I'm going to click on plus, because the only dimension, the only attribute that we're interested in is going to be the page title. In other words, which page is it that has this type of data? So I'm going to go ahead and search for page title. There we go, page title, add it in, import. And then we have the metrics. So the dimension, the attribute we're looking for here is going to be the page title. That is where we're looking at the information from. And what sort of information do we want included? The metrics is going to be the information itself. And we're looking at entrances, exits, and bounce rates. So I'm going to remove all of these. And then I'm going to add in entrance, select, exits, select, bounce rate. There we go. Select and click on import. And there they are, and I recommend keeping them in this order too. You can just change them by dragging and dropping like this, but I recommend keeping entrances, exits, and bounce rates. And then up here, we're going to use the technique of freeform. That's the one we chose, so we could build our own columns. We are not going to use any other type of column to visualize differently, because then we're going to remove the top columns up here, and we don't want to do that. We want to add in as much information, make it as clear as possible, and this table is going to be the easiest version. Moving down, we're not segmenting, so we're not going to add in any segment to compare to. Going down, we have rows, and right now it says cities. Now, these rows of the cities, we don't want to have the city that we're looking at. The only dimension that we added in here, the attribute, is going to be the page title. So I'm going to remove city, click here, and add in the page title. Amazing. So now we have the page title in here. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to look here where it says columns, and columns are going to be the data up here, and I'm not interested in the device category, so I'm going to remove it. So all we have here right now is the page titles, and the data we're getting here, the actual metrics being added in, is the total amount of active users. This is where we want to add in our entrances, exits, and bounce rates. So all I'm going to do is go down and click here, add in entrances, exits, and then bounce rates. And there we go. We've created our own table or our own columns from scratch, and now we can start dissecting this data. So let's talk a little bit about the entrances first. So entrance is wherever a person first enters your website. It could also be called a landing page in this case. So when you're ranking with different results in Google, or you're running different ads, you're going to have some ads perhaps, or some search results that's going to land you in the drinkware section. Some are going to land you in the apparel section, some in the stationery. We want to know where people enter the most, which is also going to show which are some of the most popular first pages to look at. So looking up right now, and we are filtering this by most active users on the pages first and foremost. The home page is getting the most entrances, and this is completely normal and to be expected. Looking down, we have the drinkware, apparel, and this is where we start getting some valuable information and actionable data. We can see that a lot of people are entering stationery, and stationery was one of those pages that had a super low average engagement time. But that still means that a lot of people are coming to this page for a first time visit. So either they're doing ads to this page, or it's ranking really well in Google. At any rate, I would start to look at this and see how can I improve my average engagement rate here, because it's performing really well. It's getting a lot of entrances. Again, it's all about looking at the data and see how you can make it actionable. And what you can also do is move up to entrances here and click to the left so that you arrange it on the pages that has the highest amount of entrances first. So we can see that home has the highest amount of entrances, and that makes a lot of sense. We could say that we have the big four. We have home, drinkware, apparel, and stationery being the four big ones. And this is all nice and good, but again, we know the issue with the stationery. It has a super low average engagement time, and that is where we can be actionable and improve our strategy and improve our marketing results. Okay, so let's talk about exits. Now, exits means the last page that your users visited before they exited your website. What does this mean? Well, usually exits are gonna happen, well, it can happen randomly because they have gone through your website already, but it can also happen on pages where you're not navigating them well, or a page where they're just getting tired of your website. So we are looking for patterns and anomalies. So again, looking here, we can see that home has the highest exits, and that makes a lot of sense. If we want to arrange it accordingly to most exits first, we just click there and let's start scrolling through this data. We can see that drinkware has quite a high exit number, but not in comparison to its entrances. It has less exits than entrances. And that is usually a pretty good indicator that the website is doing well, because more people are entering than they are exiting means that a lot of people who are entering it still navigate to another page afterwards. They don't just exit the page. Scrolling down again, we can see stationary. This is really where we are in trouble because it almost has as many entrances as it does exits, and that is not really a good sign, especially if you compare it to here, for example, the apparel section. This one has a lot more entrances than exits. Now we start getting into more problematic waters when we go down to men's unisex apparel here, for example. As you can see, it has a lot more exits than it has entrances. We can see the shopping cart does too, but a shopping cart, that's just a different store because it's meant to be exited at some point. We can see the same story here with the new Google Merchandise Store and the sales section. But once again, the numbers of active users aren't as high here. We're looking at the big picture first and foremost and seeing what can we repair here. And then we can start going down to looking at these more skewed numbers where we have more exit than we have entrances and see why is this the case. For example, in the sales part, maybe we aren't navigating them enough. So for example, once they've gone through the sales section, maybe we should be very clear that if they didn't find anything in the sale, this might be interesting to you. Then instead of exiting, they would navigate to another page on your website. So you always have to think in terms of your users, put yourself in their shoes and make the data actionable. And finally, let's talk about bounce rate. Now, a bounce rate means where people come into your website for the first time and they don't interact with anything and then they just leave your website. Now, bounce rate is a little different from Google Analytics 3 because in Google Analytics 3, a bounce rate was defined by coming into your website for a set amount of time and then exiting. So I think that was like if they go into your website and they exit within 15 seconds, that's a bounce rate. But here it's defined if they interact with anything on your website before they leave. If they don't, that's known as a bounce. So some websites it's going to make sense. For example, if you have a news website, a lot of people are going to come into the article, read it, and then exit and not click around. High bounce rates on news sites make a lot of sense. But generally, especially for a product store, you want to have a lower bounce rate, especially on product pages. So what we can do, once again, we can look at high and low bounce rates. Looking at the high bounce rates, we're going to get a lot of really low visited sites because the Google shop is so huge. On your website, this is probably going to make a lot more sense. You're going to have maybe a privacy policy page or something like that where you appeared in some search result, people go in and then they go out because that's not what they were looking for. But here we're not getting super much information. However, let's look for the page that has the best bounce rate. So when we're looking at good bounce rates, a really good bounce rate is at 30% and below. And a really bad bounce rate is usually at 70% and above. So you want to make sure that you are at around the 30% bounce rate span. But again, it depends on your niche and what type of website. And again, a news website is going to have a higher bounce rate, etc. But this is really interesting. We can see, for example, we have Google Online Store, men's t-shirts in here, Google Cloud Journal. We have mugs and tumblers, water bottles, emoji kitchen sticker sheet, the stationery, interestingly enough, the home page, and a bunch of different pages where the bounce rate is really low. So these are pages that are well navigated where people don't just exit, rather they go there and they click away somewhere else. And this is really good news as well for our stationery site because we know that people don't like this part. The average engagement time is so low. However, we see that the bounce rate is actually really low. So they do check it out, they dislike it, but they move on and check out something else. So again, we're getting even more intel in our data and making ourselves even more actionable. We still need to improve this to improve average engagement time, but we know that the damage done isn't that bad because they start looking at other things instead. So this is how you find the most popular and least popular pages on your website. This is how you find the pages with the highest entrances, the most exits, and the highest bounce rate. Now remember, if you're interested in even more data, check out the guidebook and then move over to the Google Analytics section, move down to pages, and you're going to have a ton of analytics intelligence prompts that you can just put in and get instant data summaries for you. And this is also true for the previous section of demographics and also the next section that's going to be about sources, mediums, and channels. All of the different reports tab we've gone through will include around 20 analytics intelligence copy-paste questions that you can use and get instant data from. With that said, let's move on to the next lecture and learn exactly where our traffic is coming from, not location-wise, but through our sources, mediums, and channels. And of course, you're going to learn what those three actually means. See you in the next lecture.